All right, we are back. We are back with Chapter 10, Principles of Cooking. So here it's starting to understand the cooking techniques and what they are, what does heat do, and understanding that. So you will gain success at cooking when you understand the ways in which heat is transferred through conduction, convection, or radiation. So conduction is, think of a pan. Okay, you put a pan on heat, right? And I put a chicken in it and that's conduction, okay? Then convection is where you have that hot, dry air circulating around. And radiation is think of a grill. Think of you grilling it. It has that heat underneath you, okay? So it's kind of understanding what the application of heat does to your proteins, to the sugars, to the starches, the waters, the fats. What's it going to do? Okay. So, heat is energy and it's transferred in three ways: conduction, convection, or radiation. And again, convection is that natural convection, that mechanical. Radiation is the infrared cooking. And again, think of your gas grill, that's your infrared, or microwave, that would be your infrared. But how does each thing work? So it's how does the heat apply? What's it do? When you're looking at these pictures, if I'm going to saute, the conduction of the pan, and what happens when the chicken hits or the eggs, and it starts to cook underneath and it cooks the whole thing. If you're boiling water, that's your convection, that heating, and it's heating all that liquid and it's rotating it and moving it, right? Radiation can be the heat underneath or on top. Think of broiling, like using a broiler. You want to brown something on top, you turn on your broiler and you gratin it, okay? But those are different ways to transfer heat. Proteins will coagulate. Your starches will gelatinize. Think of starch has that starch that will gelatinize. Think of rice. If you cook rice, it kind of gelatinizes. Sugars will caramelize, so it will brown, right? And if you caramelize it too much, it will burn. It will be that bitter caramel burn, and you'll smell it. It's horrible. Oh, throw it away. Water will evaporate. If let's say you put a pot on the stove and you turn it on high, eventually that water will literally boil, and the steam, it's evaporating, right? And fats melt. You have cold butter that melts to a liquid, or Crisco that melts. So you have these things, and what does it do? So it's just kind of understanding what heat does to it, or what does cold do to something. Proteins coagulate, loosely folding out the protein chain. It denatures the protein, where it starts to kind of break it down, and the protein coagulates and it becomes edible, right? So we're adding that heat to it. We add that caramelization, that Maillard effect, if you will, when you sear it or you grill it, and you're getting those flavors. Think of the smoky flavor of a grill. Gelatinization of starch. It's slowly, the granules start to float and they start to swell, okay? And the more it swells, the softer it gets, and that's your gelatin. If you go take some Knorr gelatin and kind of sprinkle it on some water and let it bloom, and it will sit there, and you'll start to see where it dry, it's hard, and then as it sits, you could feel it, and it becomes gelatinized. It's kind of jelly. And then you heat it up and it melts. So you have all these different stages. Caramelization of sugars is you're cooking it, and you have natural sugars in your proteins. You have sugar. Partly your flavor will kind of crust a bread, like that sugar will come out in your bread, or the browning of your meats and vegetables. That's the caramelization. The Maillard reaction is the process where the sugars break down in the presence of a protein. So that's a Maillard reaction. So you saute it, and you start to see that browning, and that's that sugar coming out. Occurs when proteins and carbohydrates are heated to 250 degrees and above. So think of saute, which is a high heat. So saute is heat the pan, heat the fat, add your product. What do you hear? right? So you're looking for that color, you're sauteing. If I'm going to sweat something, let's say I want to sweat my garlic instead of saute. If I saute my garlic, if it gets too brown and bitter, it will get bitter and burnt. So you got to be careful with it. But so I'll sweat it. It will be a lower heat with a little bit of butter or fat. And you're just sweating it at a lower heat where it's not caramelizing. Those sugars aren't coming out and browning, okay? Water, that I talked about, the water will evaporate because of the steam. Heat causes fats to melt, soften, or liquefy. Butter begins to melt at a temperature of 70 degrees, and fat will evaporate. And fat will, because butter is a mixture of milk solids, water, and fat. So when we say, especially when we clarify butter, we'll take a whole pound of butter, and we'll do a lot more than that. We'll take 20 pounds, but you guys can take 1 pound of butter and you melt it down, and you know that kind of creamy looking stuff, that's your milk solids. And then you have your water, and if you boil this, it will evaporate out, and then you'll be left with just your clarified butter, which is your fat, and it's a butter fat, and you can use a high cooking temperature where the butter won't break down on you, and it will give you that buttery flavor. So it's kind of knowing when to use it. If I'm going to saute, I'm going to use clarified butter. If at the end of a cooking technique and at the end of a sauce, I'll add a whole piece of butter. On Monte Albert, I'm adding a piece of butter. I want that creamy, buttery, milky. I want all of that in it. I'm using a solid piece of cold butter. So it's kind of knowing when to use it and when not to. Determining the doneness, observe physical changes in food. Start touching your food. You know, how you know, I'll tell you, you know, what steaks. So if you take your thumb and your index finger and you put it together and you touch right here, that would be a medium rare steak, okay? You put your middle finger in that's more of a medium, all right? Your fourth finger, see how it's getting tougher? See how it's getting a little harder, all right? And now, really press it. That's what my chicken should feel like. And here's the thing. I will cook my steaks. I'll be like, oh, that's medium rare. But when I first started, could I use touch to know? Nope. You know, if I'm cooking a beef tenderloin, I can feel it and tell you, is it done? But if I'm cooking a whole prime rib, that's a 20-pound cut of meat, no, I got to stick a thermometer in it. You know, chicken, can I tell, is it cooked or not? No, I got to use a thermometer, 165 degrees, right? Serve safe. Remember that? So it's kind of knowing those things, testing, knowing how to test for things. The carryover cooking. So think about this. So I have a prime rib, okay, so a ribeye, a whole ribeye is you can buy about 15 to 20 pounds, and it's a solid piece of meat, right? And so if I want to make prime rib, I season it and I roast it in the oven until about 110 degrees. And I'll put my thermometer into the middle and I want to have 110, all right? Because medium rare is 135 to 130 to 135 should be your degree of done for medium rare, all right? 140 to 145 is going to be medium. Usually with my prime rib, I cook it to a medium rare because when you look at the middle is going to be your rarest, and as you work your way out, you've got your medium well, and your well done on the ends. All right? So as this is cooking, you pull it out at 110 degrees, and I just told you it should be what? 130 to 135 for medium rare. And so with that, the carryover cooking is that it had this hot, dry air. All this heat is still in that 20 pounds. So as it sits and rests, the juices are all on the edges, okay? So now my juices are going to equalize. Have you ever pulled something out of the oven? You cut it immediately and the juices go everywhere. You got to let it rest. You got to let those juices equalize. And my temperature has the carryover cooking. And the carryover cooking is I still have that heat locked in there, and my temperature is going to rise. The larger the cut, the more carryover cooking you're going to have. So usually with a 20-pound prime rib, I'm going to have about 20 degrees of carryover cooking. So it's knowing that. If I do a beef tenderloin, I'm going to have maybe 10 degrees. So I'll cook that to 120 degrees. So it's kind of knowing what your temperatures are and understanding them. Cooking methods, so you have your dry heat cooking method, which is your air and fat. So think about, so dry heat cooking method would be my oven, okay? So because it's a dry heat, my fat, so frying. So frying is a dry heat cooking method, all right? Your moist heat cooking methods is your water, your steam. Think about, am I boiling? If I'm gonna boil something, or if I'm steaming something, that's my moist heat cooking method. And then my combination is my braising. Okay, so braising has both where I sear my product and then I cook it in a liquid. All right, so it's just kind of knowing what you're doing. Okay, so dry heat cooking methods, you have broiling, grilling, roasting, poêle, that's a French technique, barbecuing, sauteing, stir frying, pan frying, deep frying. All of those are using a high heat, all right, and it's a dry heat, all right? There's no moisture, there's no liquid to it. Just because you're using oil for frying and pan frying, it doesn't mean it's liquid, all right? I'm talking about water, stock, something like that. I'm not talking about fat, all right? So that would be that's your dry heat cooking method. You got to know these, okay? You got to know that saute is a dry heat cooking method. Your moist heat is poaching. So let's say I want to poach some salmon. I'm going to cook it in a flavored liquid, okay, that's completely submerged. So I can poach some salmon. Usually I'll put some lemon and some herbs and some salt, and let it kind of poach in there. And poaching temperatures 160 to 180. So it's 160 to 180 degrees is your poaching temperature. It's a gentle cooking. All right. Boiling is 212. It's erratic. Think of, you turn your on high, let the water boil, and that's boiling. If I want to boil some potatoes, I'm going to boil them. Steaming, I can steam my rice or steam my vegetables. It changes the texture, all right, through using steam. So, and then your last is your combination cooking method, which is your braising. So braising is taking tough cuts of meat. Braising is a long cooking time. It's usually longer. You're taking a tough cut of meat, a tough product, and you're cooking it and making it tender. And you're using both dry method and wet method, moist method, excuse me. So you're going to sear it, and you're going to use some liquid, some stock to cook it in, and then you cover it, you put it in the oven, and you let it cook for hours on end, and this tough cut of meat becomes really tender. That liquid that it cooked in becomes your sauce. You kind of finish it up and make your sauce. And it's a beautiful thing. It's one of my favorite cooking techniques, to be honest, because it just makes it so flavorful. So you have that. Sous vide, that's a new cooking technique in the last 10 years. You kind of vacuum seal your product. So you can take your product, let's say I can take some chicken, and I take some lemon and basil, and maybe a little piece of butter, and I just season it, and I put it in the pouch, and I vacuum seal it, and so it's airtight, right? And then I can take it and I put it in this water that has this temperature. It's a low temperature, about 150 to 180, and it's a slow cooking time, and it will cook it. And what restaurants do is they cook it about 3/4 of the way. And think about it, it's cooking in this pouch that has all these flavors in it. All right, so it's kind of marinating at the same time. And then you can take it and put it in your cooler, and then tomorrow, let's say you want to pull it out and you sear the top of it and get some browning on it, and you finish cooking it, and boom, voila, it's done. And it has all these wonderful flavors. So that's your sous vide. And a lot of people love doing that. I know here in Edgar's they use that. And they do it with a chicken dish and a pork dish. So it really turns out beautiful. So it's just kind of understand the principles of cooking. So when you guys get into methods and fab, we're going to dig a lot deeper than what that was, but that's kind of just letting you kind of see what is it that you need to start looking at. So saute is heat the pan, heat the fat, add my product, right? Grilling is let my grill get hot, and then I'm going to add my product. And it's going to sit there, and when I'm grilling, what do I want? I want beautiful crosshatch. I want that diamond mark. How do I get it? 2 and 10. So I place my chicken and I pick it up at 10 o'clock and I move it to 2 o'clock, or I pick it up at 2 o'clock and I move it to 10 o'clock. And just think of a clock on your grill. But those are techniques that we will teach you. All right. So those are our principles of cooking. Talk to you later. Bye.